I've lost the ability to distinguish between right from wrong, good from bad. I'm scared, Ma. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm plunging headfirst into some kind of black void of sheer, utter madness or something.
Do you want a sandwich?
The great mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore, the woman arrayed in purple and scarlet. Kings of the earth have committed fornications and lived deliciously with her. They shall wail and lament when they see the smoke of her burning.
So you've seen her?
She's in the bar.
God bless.
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Bears Presents The Bear Cave of Terror. I'm your hairy heavy homo and horror fan host, Steve Morey. Each week here in the Bear Cave, I invite a horror-loving guest who brings with them one of their favorite scary movies. It can be classic, gory, trashy, obscure, well-known, or something probably still banned in Britain. In other words, a thrilling work of cinematic terror that we think you might enjoy. And in each episode, we'll dig into the flesh and bone of the film, highlighting our favorite scary moments, as well as stories and details from beyond the screen, all while our guest imparts their deep and possibly concerning love for this week's frightful vision unto you, our dear listener. And this week, we have Mr. Tito Gutierrez and in the Bear Cave with us. Tito.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello.
Welcome.
Bear Cave. Hello. My name is Tito. I am a connoisseur of most things trashy and inappropriate and silly. Chihuahua connoisseur, and I'm also one of Zorro's part-time girls. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to talking about one of my favorite films that I actually haven't seen in a while. So any excuse to talk about one of the great cinematic masterpiece of the last 50 years I'm always up for it. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And speaking of this famous exploitation masterpiece that we're going to be talking about, what is the name of it?
The name of this film is called Frankenhooker. And I discovered this probably in high school because, my parents were, my mother was really, permissive of certain things. But, certain horror films was just, no, you're not allowed. So, and even then, when we would go to the local video store in the strip mall, those films I would just love looking at the horror films and the big boxes and the names. And when you see a film called Frankenhooker, of course, you just, can we rent this? And I didn't even bother asking because I knew what the answer would be. But maybe a couple of years later, when I finally rented it with one of my best friends at the time, and I think maybe like 10 minutes into the film, it became our favorite film, and we were just hooked. And it's become one of my many obsessions. So Frankenhooker, the name tells you what it's all about.
Absolutely. And kind of like you, I remember going to the pharmacy, because that's where our video store was in the early 90s, was in this pharmacy. And I remember passing by the box all the time. I knew I could never rent it. Like, one, I was way too young. The people at the counter would be like, no kid. But even my mom nobody would have permitted it in my family. But that box art and the write-up on the back, it just made it sound just so crazy and awesome. And I was researching this, that some video stores had a box that if you picked it up, it had a sound chip in it, and it would say, want a date? As soon as you picked up the box. So anybody in the store would know what you sicko, are looking at.
One of my best friends has that box still in her house, and it still works.
So awesome. What's this movie about? I mean, we can kind of guess from the title and from the box art, but if you could sum it up in a couple words, like what is it? What's going on in Frankenhooker?
The film takes place in New Jersey. It was released in 1990, I believe. And this amateur scientist, medical school reject, engaged to his, I'm assuming, a high school sweetheart, kind of overweight at the time. The film begins at, well, it's a birthday party, and the woman reveals the gift for the father, which is this huge riding lawnmower, which our hero modified with all sorts of gadgets and remote controls. Long story short, she gets run over by the lawnmower. Parts here, parts there. He runs off with the good parts, tries to put her back together again. But also, we also have to remember that he still lives in his mother's basement. And so he's very lonely, very introverted, socially awkward. Other socially awkward people will think this guy's crazy. Tries to figuring out how to put this woman his fiancee back together again. He gets this idea to go to Times Square, finds a bunch of hookers, and that's where the trouble starts and the fun begins. That's the best way that I could sort of explain it.
I think that's perfect because it starts off. It's pretty funny. So this is for a horror movie. This is definitely a funny. Like the premise is funny. The dialogue is great, but also a lot of the outcomes, aside from being pretty explosive, are actually kind of they're fun. There's enough to laugh at here, along with the body horror. Like you've got it all. So you've got the horror element, but you've also got it's almost satire, but a little bit beyond satire.
This film in particular is really right up my alley, where I do enjoy horror, but the older I get, the more I'm like, I don't want that. Because, really quick background about me is, I'm a case manager. I work with homeless people next to homeless people, so I see real life horror every day. So on my free time, I don't want to watch. I mean, didn't I just come back from work to see this? So fun, hilarious, over the top, inappropriate. Exploding hookers is just really what I need when I come back from a hard day of work.
Literally, I mean that scene, and it was definitely one of my favorite scenes. Is the main character who's the he's kind of the amateur mad scientist here. I love it. Like when he's having a brainstorm, he gets out his drill and like drills holes in his head.
And I completely forgot about that's how he would brainstorm. And I think even around that time in the 80s and the early 90s, there was a whole movement of people who would drill actually into their brains because, well, of course, back in the medieval times, they would drill a hole into you to let the evil spirits out. But there was a group of people who believed that drilling a hole into you had a lot of medical benefits. And it was almost like extreme acupuncture. And there was actually an episode of ER where this is the dawn of the internet, and this guy was into the ER because he put a drill into his brain. But then when I saw that again this morning, it's like I remember that was a thing back then. So that's where he would get his the bright ideas to go to Times Square because there's lots of hookers over there. Because remember, he was watching that version of the Morton Downey show, and they had Right. He had the prostitute who was advocating for prostitution rights and for it should be legal. And fun fact, that woman was actually in Basket Case. She played one of the hookers that was in that hotel room in Times Square. So that's where he gets the idea and all of that.
And on top of that, with that Morton Downey Jr. So that's what I was watching, that scene where he's trying to figure out a way to, one, get these sex workers in a place where he can take their parts, but also try and figure out like how to do it easily so that he's not killing them. Yeah. He doesn't want to actually murder anybody, but he's not going to stop them from killing themselves. And the way that he does it is he's like, well, they're all addicted to crack.
They can just say no. But this was also very progressive because, here's a film that's actually showing, even though I don't think it was its intention, but it was like sex workers' rights, and sex work is real work and we shouldn't demonize it. So, and also for the younger folks who don't know who Morton Downey Jr. was, he was kind of like a precursor to maybe Jerry Springer. It was like a very combative talk show host, and he would smoke and just kind of rile people up. And so, yeah. I totally forgot about that whole phenomenon back then, but yeah. So it was, Frankenhooker was quite progressive for the time.
It was. I was surprised when they're talking about it, and of course the lesson that he learns from that isn't so much like, well, yeah, we should take care and protect them, and I should not go out trying to hunt body parts from them, but instead he creates supercrack that causes people who consume it to actually explode into various parts. And that scene in the hotel room where he's playing doctor and, he's got all the ladies there and he's like checking off body parts like, oh, this leg and that ass and these boobs and all this stuff. But then, of course, he has a change of heart. He realizes, these are people. He spent the entire 30 minutes of this great montage just like really treating them like pieces of meat, and then realizes this is not right. I can't do this. This is wrong. And then they find the supercrack. And then, of course, they explode.
I just remember when I first saw that as a teenager, my friend and I were laughing so freaking. Well, first of all, the part where she's trying to put that huge golf ball sized supercrack rock into the tiny little stuff. That was just genius. But the whole explosion motif, or whatever you want to call it, I just they were robbed of the People's Choice Award that year for special effects.
I actually got the person's name because they've interviewed him a few times about his various work, but it was looks like it was Al. I want to say it's Magliochetti or Magliochetti, who did the special effects, the actual physical effects, and then Gabe Bartolos did the actual makeup effects for Patty Mullen, who plays Elizabeth, the Frankenhooker. When he gets all these body parts, he just shoves them all into his car, brings them back to his mom's house, and he's just got like these rolling trash bins filled with legs and arms and heads and just like piles of individual boobs. But it's great. And he of course he picks the parts he wants and he puts them all together and brings Elizabeth back to life. And Elizabeth, when she wakes up, is not the same girl that he that he knew.
It becomes like a Re-Animator for even bigger perverts. So she kind of takes on the personalities and of the sex workers who were blown up with the crack. But then occasionally it's kind of like, what is it, Sybil or something like that. Elizabeth would kind of come back and saying, hey, wait a minute, look, oh my God, a lawnmower. And then it's like, got any money?
What a day.
We only have 30 minutes before, we have to go back in the streets.
It's really interesting. There's actually, if you run down all the things she says, almost everything are the exact same lines that one of the sex workers, I want to say it was Angel, says earlier in the movie. And it's just like the exact same lines. And she's just repeating them randomly on the subway, at the bar. Just, it's wild. I think most people, if they've seen this movie, they can never get "what a day" out of their heads.
That's like the E.T. phone home of this film.
It is. I thought it's just really well paced. It's fun. Like anytime that there starts to be a really serious moment, there's something that'll turn it around. And one of my favorite parts, other than the exploding sex worker scene in the hotel room, is earlier, the main character's mother comes in, and it's played by Louise Lasser, who was Mary Hartman, who's notoriously kind of like a weird character, who doesn't really understand social cues. And she's sitting there talking with him like, oh, honey, you just need to get out there and find somebody new. Everything's silent. The camera focuses on him, and he's just talking about all these dark things that are just really horrible. Like, I no longer have the ability to differentiate between good and evil and blah, blah, blah. And she just looks at him. She says, want a sandwich?
That what got the biggest laugh out of my friend and I. And that was the thing that made me, okay, we're staying with this film. And little quick sidebar, my friend and I, we were really, really close at one time, and we've been through a lot of stuff. And there's been a lot of times we'd be discussing really heavy things that are going on in our life. And there'd be times where we'll both be crying. And to sort of break this, one of us would tell each other, "Want a sandwich?" And then we just start hugging.
So, and I do have to say the director of this is Frank. I can never get his name right, but it's Frank Henenlotter.
Frank Henenlotter,
Henenlotter.
yeah.
Frank Henenlotter. Who is probably most famous for a lot of people for Basket Case, the first 3 Basket Case movies, Brain Damage, and I think the last one he did was
Bad Biology, which was back in 2008.
Bad Biology.
Yes. Just short but very sweet filmography, but I wish he would do more films. But most of his, I have not seen Basket Case 3 yet, but most of his films pack a lot of punch.
They do.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, Frankenhooker and Basket Case 2 were being filmed back to back. They had the same studio space, and they were just, going. They were like, we'll use the same sets. We'll just use the same locations because we got them here. We might as well do it. And so they split the cost, which was really good. But yeah, I mean, this movie has so much to it where, it goes into the Frankenstein. It's obviously based on sort of Frankenstein. You mentioned Re-Animator, which I think this one shares a lot of DNA with.
Of course, yeah. I saw Re-Animator, the musical, more recent than I've seen the Re-Animator film, but yes, definitely Re-Animator. The body horror element towards the very end, which I kind of just like, it becomes Society at the famous body horror film Society.
Right. Like the creatures that the special effects and the makeup effects people like that create, like they're the body parts that were left over.
Yes.
Have all just kind of like fused together and come back alive to life.
Thing also.
Yeah, The Thing. It's like The Thing, Society, just all mixed together, and they confront Zorro. they come running out like Zorro tracks down Elizabeth because he's like, oh, you're the one who stole my girls or whatever, and ends up cutting off Jeffrey's head with a machete. It's in revenge. The body parts drag him into.
You also have to realize that, because Zorro's stable of women have all been decimated, and when a pimp loses his women, he's nothing. So this is Zorro, who has just been dethroned and is nothing, and he is now getting his revenge.
He's getting his revenge, but then they get their revenge on him for.
It's almost like Jurassic Park. When you try to play God, it just does not work. So this is again, Jurassic Park for perverts.
And I think that was one of those things too, where, if somebody had seen this like edited for TV, I think half of the movie would have just been cut out because there's a great attitude towards nudity that's there. It's, this is it's exploitation. There's a lot of sex in there, but it's all pretty funny. None of it's really tittillating. It's just crazy.
You're just wall-to-wall nipples and butt cheek, but none of it is. I even asked my straight friends, does that turn you? I was like, no, it's just. But definitely Frankenhooker had the feel of like a USA Up All Night movie, if anybody remembers USA Up All Night. But it's one of those films like even USA Up All Night couldn't play.
But yeah, no, this movie just has so much to enjoy. The dialogue is great. The effects are fun. Like the effects, I think, if you're expecting a lot of blood, there's almost no blood, period, in this whole movie. When everybody explodes, it's very much on the way that they made got the effect of exploding people is they rigged up a lot of plaster and plastic casts of the women and just stuck a whole bunch of charges in there.
I would have loved to have seen like a making of this film and just seeing like the actual footage of these women having plaster poured all over them and having them stay there for about a couple hours.
Well, they interviewed Patty Mullen, who former Penthouse Pet and also who plays Elizabeth in this, and they've interviewed her about how they did that, and she actually loved it. She loved the whole process. It took about 3 hours to get the makeup on because they would do her face, and then because one of her arms was actually completely different skin color, and then her hands and all sorts of things. But it would be 3 hours in the chair, and she was like, "This is great." And they she had like the whole plaster mold of her face taken, and she said that that's so much fun that she bets that Gabe still probably has it somewhere.
I met, her name is Charlotte Kemp, but then she's credited as Charlotte Helmkamp in the film. She plays Honey. She is one of the she's actually the first hooker that Jeffrey meets when he gets to Times Square. And she's the one that introduces him to Zorro and kind of gathers up all the other hookers. But I met her at my very first Comic Con back in 2007. If anybody's been to Comic Con, you know how just overwhelming and stimulating everything is over there. But so I got her autograph and I actually have her. She signed my poster. But oh gosh, I wish I could have told. I mean, I try to tell her like, what? He just goes, "We just had the best time on the set, and it was so much fun to make." And she's there, she hasn't done a lot of stuff. She's just done Penthouse before, but I just really wish I could have asked her like, what was it like to have your body parts blown up and the whole process of them doing molds of your entire body.
It really like it's wild how much work went into this, and one of the things because I've listened to some great interviews with Henenlotter, and
Yeah.
one of the things that he said was a little bit different in this, like making this movie, was that because they had money, they actually had a union production crew, and he was kind of the the school of like, if I'm going to be making changes, I want to make them on the fly. Like, we got to be able to do all this stuff whenever we want. And with a union, it's a little bit, you have to stick to a certain number of hours and you have to, plan a little bit better. And so he was like, yeah, that was really difficult. Like it wasn't worse. It was just difficult because these people were all really, really great at what they did. But we just had to kind of change things. And so Fangoria and a couple other articles that I read went and spoke to some of the production crew, and they're like, yeah, even still, he has a tendency to change his mind on the day we're about to start filming. And it's like, actually, can we do this instead? And it's like, oh, man. So, no matter how he perceived it as being difficult, I think the people who worked under him were like, you know what? It's still the way you normally make movies.
Yeah.
So. But
it just can't be as, even with these restraints, you still have to.
It's kind of cool. It kind of shows that, his directing style and the people that work with him, it really puts a thumbprint on it so that you're watching.
Yes.
You're watching one of his movies. You're watching a Henenlotter movie.
And one of the main things why I love about his films, I just love the way he filmed dirty, scummy, gross New York, pre-Disney Times Square. And, and which I remember when Times Square literally looked like that. When my first trips to New York was in '85 when my father first moved there. And I went there with my grandmother, my brother, my sister. And our grandmother took us to see Cats at the Winterland Theater in Times Square. And the first thing that we see when the taxi cab dropped us off was just basically, we were like on that movie set of Frankenhooker. We saw the working girls and the peep shows and magazines on the floor. And I just remember my grandma, just look down, don't look up, being just so fascinated. So I think one reason why I love this film and why I love old New York, it just reminds me of that time. Old, sleazy prostitution, drug addict. It just reminds me of my grandmother. It just gives me a warm feeling.
It's so true too. And like watching this movie, it's so much of that time capsule. It really is like a very specific time and a very specific side of New York that a lot of Hollywood movies would ignore or try to gloss over. And this one, it's almost like a John Waters in Baltimore movie, like it's all going to be the warts. Like you're going to see real, like these are real people. This is what's really going on, but they're still living their lives and they're still thriving in their own way. Except unfortunately here, most of them seem to be addicted to crack.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah. I think it's either New Jersey or something. And I think we have friends who can actually, verify, where you can still find some good sleaze in Manhattan, but now, whenever I think about Manhattan, I just think of, I don't know, CVS and nothing.
There's still some parts that you can catch that with. New York has changed so much, and in some cases for the better, in some cases, maybe not as great. But what gets me about this too is how everybody sounds like New York. They sound like New Jersey. Like they don't cover up the accent. Like people who are in this movie are from there and they have that accent, and they are just like Patty Mullen to this day. She's lived in Florida for for decades, I think at this point. She still sounds like she just stepped off the bus from Hohokus, and it's really funny. I really enjoyed this movie, and I think it's one of those things that you can watch again and again and still just have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and what I first thought was almost like I took it and just ran with it. I just could not wait to tell people about this film. I couldn't wait to show it to people. I mean, this was like, to know me is to know how much I love Showgirls. If you've met me, I pretty much forced you to watch Showgirls almost against your will sometimes. But before that was Frankenhooker, and I would really just love to watch people's reaction to this film. And I just really ran with it. Anything that I remember once when I was at my previous job, I used to work for Channel 2, the TV station, and we used to have season tickets to the Greek Theater. I got tickets to see the Allman Brothers at the Greek Theater, but before the show, there was a matinee of Frankenhooker at the Egyptian Theater, and I wore my Frankenhooker T-shirt. After that screening, I went to see the concert, not knowing that my boss and our general manager was there. So I'm talking to my boss and my general manager wearing a Frankenhooker T-shirt. And I'm doing my best to like cover up and just kind of cross my arms and stuff. But I also loved how I think a lot of younger people are discovering this film. Earlier in this podcast, I said that when it comes to horror, I like what I like. I'm not really that much of a horror guy, but my interests are very specific. But that being said, I love going to horror conventions. I go to at least 3 a year, and what I've noticed, especially post pandemic, is there's been a lot of Frankenhooker cosplay. More and more I see, I think the first time I saw one was back in 2001 in Pasadena. Somebody was dressed up as Elizabeth / the Frankenhooker. And I think the last horror convention I went to was Midsummer Scream in Long Beach, and there was 3 women dressed up as Frankenhooker, and they couldn't have been more than, I don't know, they were under 30 years old. So I just love how it's sort of taken on this life of its own, and people are picking this up and running with it, and it's continuing to stand the test of time, I guess.
Yeah, there is so much, like the 80s to like the very, very early 90s. This is the kind of stuff that you would see at your video store all the time. You just walk by, you'd see the box, you'd wonder what it was, and then pick it up. And you could, it'd be a gory flick, pretty scary, or something like this, where it's like exploitation and humor and, just kind of over the topness. One of the things that Frank Henenlotter had said in a couple of the interviews I read is that after that period, it got harder to make movies like this.
Yeah.
It wasn't as easy to, find independent backing, find the money to go ahead and do this. A lot of the people who used to do the practical effects and all that stuff for relatively cheap, they moved on. They either moved to other industries or they got poached by like bigger productions that could pay them good money.
Yeah, I mean, before we spoke earlier about the special effects people and the art directors. They've gone on to make these big Hollywood movies, and it was like we're going through their IMDb's. We're like, wow, that even Leprechaun.
Yeah, Gabe Bartalos designed that. I mean, that's it's kind of one of those sad things where in the 80s, with cheap video reproduction, you could distribute the stuff really easily. You could get it into video stores and in people's hands. But, once Blockbuster kind of took over and they stopped carrying a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, because you didn't see those, and you didn't, because, I mean, they probably saw this as porn adjacent, and they just didn't want anything to do with that.
Yeah. And, there were some, like, obviously there were some, like, franchise stores that would still carry that stuff. But they weren't promoting it. Like, you didn't have those independent video stores that would make it really available and make it visible to people to rent. And of course, the independent producers aren't there because they're like, well, there's not much of a market anymore, or, they all went belly up. So there's just not a lot that was being produced that way. And obviously there was other independent film movements and stuff, but it's the horror that really kind of kind of suffered, I think, for a while. And now it's, once digital started taking off, I think that helped revive a lot of independent horror productions. But
Well, at least for me, at least, because like I said, I love going to horror conventions. It's almost like it's just that's where it lives, and that's where all of these you find out about these independent films. And there's a lot of it out there because it's just easier to easy. I don't know. I'm not going to say it's easier to produce, but it's I guess the equipment and all this stuff and the interest is more accessible than it was maybe 20 years ago.
right, yeah, I think it's kind of gone back to that a little bit, where there's anybody with a camera and a hookup with to somebody who can do like tape dubbing was able to make a movie and put something on the shelves back in the 80s. But like now, if you've got a digital camera, which most of us, I mean, we got digital cameras in our pockets, you can make a movie, and you can edit it, and you could put it out online, and maybe somebody will like it. And I think that kind of encourages more people to make stuff like this. And this, looking back and seeing a Frank Henenlotter movie and seeing some of the equivalent movies that came out in the 80s that were like this kind of exploitation and horror, it's good inspiration.
That's what I absolutely love because, like I said earlier, my 9 to 5 life, it is very real, and there's a lot of stuff that makes Salo look like a Full House. To see something like this, so ridiculous, over the top, such an escape. It's just, I love it more now than I did when I was 15, 16, 17. I appreciate it a lot more.
I'm the same way, because again, like when I saw it once when I was like maybe 19. Watching it as an adult in my mid 40s, I appreciate it so much for what the director was trying to do, what the actors accomplished, what the makeup and special effects guys did. Like, they did a great job, and they made something that lasts.
And I'm just kind of upset that we never got, or never say never, but a Frankenhooker 2, because spoiler alert, if you don't want to know, our hero Jeffrey gets Frankenhookerized. He gets because he kept very good notes, the actual Frankenhooker was able to recreate him using the spare parts of the blown up prostitutes. And because, I guess what was it? The blood is only estrogen based, so I can only recreate women. I would just love to see their lives together as these, Frankenhookers, Frankenbride and Frankengroom. It's just, we deserve a sequel because, the original Frankenstein from the 30s, I believe Bride of Frankenstein is a much better film. So I just hopefully that could have been maybe done in that tradition. Maybe this could have been like a Frankenhooker 2 could have been the Empire Strikes Back of this franchise. So I really hope that maybe someone, some independent filmmaker can work with the director and maybe just see if we could get this going, a Frankenhooker 2.
I agree. I think Bride of Frankenhooker would be so perfect to do. Hey, maybe they'll be able to find Joe Gonzalez, who played Zorro, and see what he looks like today. Because I don't know about you, but
Actually, I had a big crush on the dude. When he goes to the men's room and there's that whole crack den going on. There's the big whoopee dude who's talking behind his ear, blah 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 blah, and then he gives him a big bag of crack and all that stuff. But it was like, if that guy didn't have a fucking problem, man, he's good to go. Because maybe, he probably still looks the same because the sax player from the Lost Boys, Tim Capello, he still plays. He still does conventions, and he's still pretty built. So you never know.
Like we talked about Tim Capello when we did Lost Boys, and he shockingly still looks pretty much the same, and also still has the same sort of crimped mullet thing. So, like if you had a crush on him in '87, man, you can live your dream by seeing him today. The name of the actor is Ari M. Rusimov. He looks like he is actually a painter and a director. And he was in Brain Damage as well, which was the movie done before Frankenhooker by the same director. And that's actually where Joe Gonzalez got his start, because Joe Gonzalez is not an actor. They needed somebody huge and beefy for Brain Damage. They found him and they invited him back to be the pimp Zorro in this movie. And man, thank you, casting director, for getting him back. So there is one story that Frank Henenlotter tells about getting a rating for Frankenhooker. So one of the things that, in the U.S., what you have to do, you always have to submit a movie to the MPAA.
Yes.
And they watch it. Whoever watches it, they're, different person every time, possibly. Famously, you can get different results by having different people watch your movie. But they sent it out, and the rep from the MPAA called one of the producers and told the producers, like, "Hey, we're actually going to give this one an S rating."
S.
And the producer's like, "Well, what are you talking about? S? What's S?" And he's like, S for shit. What was hilarious about this is that they didn't appreciate that joke. And so the producers actually went straight to the trade papers, went to Variety and all that, and complained about it and said, super unprofessional. They don't need to talk about the quality of the film. The only thing that they're supposed to be doing is giving us a rating, not, your movie sucks.
Stupid.
And
yes, we know the title is called Frankenhooker.
Yeah, exactly. And they, I don't think they ever got a response on that, but I think it gave them some nice free publicity. There was one other cool thing about this movie. The character of the weatherman,
Yes,
who appears briefly, was played by Zacherle, who is a horror TV host,
like a horror movie presenter. And I have they reissued his album where he tells spooky stories, and but I remember I missed that, and I just remembered that when I saw it again when I rewatched Frankenhooker. So I thought that was really cool. And another fun fact: I'm also a Deadhead amongst other things. I love the Grateful Dead. I love just listening to a 3-hour concert and just dissecting it. Well, there's one concert from the Fillmore East in New York City from 1970, and I just got a vinyl reissue of that entire show. It's a short show. It's only about 3.5 hours. The band is introduced by Zacherle, and he said something in that same voice. What is this Grateful Dead nonsense? I'm dead, not them.
Apparently he had such a good sense of humor being in this movie. He was also the voice of the parasite in Brain Damage as well. So they were, didn't have a lot of hard time getting him back. The story with him being a weatherman, a TV weatherman in this, is that Henenlotter basically said to the makeup guys, don't do his makeup. Have him do his own makeup as if he were presenting a horror film. And so when you watch Frankenhooker and you see the weatherman, he's got the sunken eyes and like his clothing looks a little bit ragged, and he's doing it as if he's like introducing a horror movie. It's like, oh, there's a spooky storm coming and it's good for all you mad scientists out there. And you're like, what is going on? Well, thank you so much for joining me and talking about Frankenhooker with me. I think this is wonderful. And for all the listeners, I hope you go and check out this movie for sure. It is so much fun.
For those for your audience, Steve and I, we chat literally every single day we're in concert. So it's always good to actually see your face move and to hear your actual voice rather than click, 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 just to remind ourselves, just, welfare check. We're actually real people. So it's always another great excuse to talk to you in person. So thank you very much.
You've just listened to another episode of the Bear Cave of Terror, and if you haven't seen Frankenhooker, or after listening to us are struck with an irresistible compulsion to watch it again, it's streaming for free on Amazon Prime, Tubi, Plex, and a bunch of others, and it is available digitally and on physical media if you can still find it. And Tito, if listeners would like to get in touch, how would they do that?
The best way to do it is to find me on Instagram. I am Tito Agogo on Instagram, and I would just love to hear from you guys. Or you can find me at Disneyland at least twice a week, because I literally live down the street from Disneyland, so I'm always there.
So just remember, everyone, just go up to Tito and ask him, want a date? Or,
You'll find me in front of Mr. Toad, so just say wanted, that'll be the code word.
If you would like to follow the Bear Cave of Terror, you can do so on Blue Sky at Bear Cave of Terror, or on Instagram at Bear Cave of Terror, or you can send an email to bearcaveofterror@gmail.com. Easy to remember.
And then every time you say want a date, and we'll know what you're talking about.
Exactly, want a date in the subject line. A list of sources will be available in the show notes if you'd like to learn more about the original Frankenhooker and the history of that. But in any case, good night, and remember, want a date? Looking for some action?
Got any money?
Good night, everyone.
Ciao, everyone.
No, wait. Huh? It's Jeffrey. Jeffrey.
Got any money?
Money? No, I don't have any money.